Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we will start looking at database views. Now, a view in a database structure is basically a virtual table whose contents are defined by some form of query. There are many ways of explaining what a view is. Some say it's a virtual table, some say it's just an abstract expression of a query or representation of a query rather. I mean, you'll get different definitions and that's based on perspective, but ultimately, basically any definition is trying to say the same thing. It's a representation of data from one or more tables without actually querying the table. So some of the uses of a view would be like to focus and simplify, maybe even customize the perception of a user of the data in the database. And in standard English, that simply means if we are including 3-4 tables in a query that need to represent data, instead of having to hit those tables directly, we write that query one time, save it as a view, and then from that point on, anybody who needs that kind of data can just access the view. Another important functionality of a view is its use as a security mechanism, because we don't necessarily always want users to be able to access the table or tables directly. So we just create a view and allow them to access the view to see the data. It's also read-only, so they can't manipulate the data by manipulating the view. You can only, modify the query, and the view is just a representation or manifestation of that query. So that was quite a mouthful. And on my screen here, you see that we have the school database open. And once it is opened or expanded, we see that there is a folder here called views. So we're just going to right click on that folder and go ahead and create a new view. So the view, of course, is relative to the database that is being selected. So the view is being created inside of a database. But that being said, a view can comprise tables from other databases. So even though it may be local to school database, if there was a table in another database that we wanted to include in a query, we can actually accomplish all of that and publish one view that represents all of those data points from all of those databases. But for now, we'll just keep it simple, and we'll right click views and click new view, which will then open up Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio's query editor. So the first thing they ask us is, what tables do we want to include in our query? So ultimately, once again, the view is just a manifestation of the results of a query. So first we have to write or build a query. So it's the first time we're seeing this query editor, and I can tell you right now, I'm not very versed at this, so I'm going to show you the basics. I won't get too advanced, but up until now, we've been writing more and more advanced queries. So I'm going to show you how to build a query, a basic query from this view to get, from this interface to get a view built on that query. And then I'm going to use one of the queries that we would have written in previous times and build a view based on that. All right, so let's continue. So firstly, we add the tables that we know we want for this query. So let us probably take courses and students. So I'm just going to click courses, hold down on the control button and click students. Of course, if you wanted them all, you could just select them all. So you can select as many or as few as you need. So once again, I'm just selecting students and courses, and I'm going to click add. And then in the background, you see it kind of creates this, representation of the tables. Once I'm finished with that, I can click close. And you would also notice that you can actually create views based on other views, because if we had views, we could have selected them to be included in the query building. And you also have functions and synonyms. So for now, I'm just going to add courses, students, and then click close, which will then have these two, but that's not good. I need enrollments because these don't really have a relationship. So I'm going to add another one that would probably, so I'm just going to right click in the empty space, click add table, and I'm going to include enrollments, because that would actually tie those two tables together. There we go. So now we're seeing those relationships, and I can rearrange them for my easier viewing. Now, the view that I want is going to have the student. So I'm going to have the first name and the last name of any student. And I'm also going to include the course code and name of the course that the student is currently enrolled in. All right. So this will be made possible because, as you notice, as you click or unclick these columns, you'll see that this section is being modified according to what you're selecting or deselecting, and the query is being modified, and they're generating all of the inner joins and all of those things to make sure that all the data that we need is being represented properly. Now we can preview all of this work by right-clicking in the empty space, and we can click Execute SQL, and then a results pane will show up at the bottom of our screen showing us, what this query would yield. So it would be the same thing as us writing that query in a new query window and executing it, and then we would see exactly what data would come back. So this data is basically what I want to see. And once again, we could have written this query by ourselves. So I'm just going to highlight this, right click, copy it, and then open up a new query. So I'm going to go to new query, and I'm just going to paste it so that we can see it in a bigger display, what exactly was being generated. And then I'm just going to format it a little so it falls better in the screen. All right, so I just formatted it a bit, and we see here where it's selecting the columns, and you notice it's saying dbo.students. So it's basically DBO represents the name of the database, which is school, and then students.firstname, students.courses. So we went through all of this, and this is basically an inner join query that we would have looked at. Is just joining two tables so that we can get all of the relevant columns. All right, so we're selecting from courses, but we're inner joining enrollments and students so that we can get students info and courses info. And of course, enrollments was that linker table between the two. The point of this, however, is that this query is a simple, it's just a select query. And it may not be the simplest query in the world, but it's not the most complicated. But the point is, we probably don't want to have to rewrite this or execute all this every time we want to see that data. So going back to our view design, we can actually just design that query, get it up to standard. And like, for instance, we have first name and last name. We went through aliases. So I can actually just use this query builder and put on an alias. So first name with a capital F, last name with a capital L, and course code with a space in it, course code, and we can leave title. But notice what happened in the code. As I put in the aliases in this grid form or this tabular form, the code actually got modified to facilitate all of that. And so once again, I can execute query, just right click in the empty space, execute query, and then I see the results look more palatable for human consumption. So now that I'm satisfied with this view, I can click save. I can click save here or just use Control S on my keyboard. And then I'm going to be asked to give a name to the view. So I can give this one student courses. So I name this one student_courses. And I would suggest that you follow the same kind of naming convention with no spaces and so on, like we were doing with the tables. That's my suggestion. So student_courses, and we click OK. And then that would have saved our view. Now, if we go back to our views folder and drill down in, then we will see that construct or this object called student_courses. Now you're probably wondering, now I created a view, so what? Now the relevance of the view is that once again, I don't have to execute this huge query each time I want to see this kind of data. So I'm just going to execute it this one time, and then we can look at the result set. And then alternatively, now that I have a view that actually runs this query anyway, I can now just select from the view. So I can say select star from, And then my view is called student underscore courses. So remember that it's a virtual table. So the fact that it exists now means that I can query it. And then by saying select star from that view, what it really does is execute this huge query in the background, but it's all encapsulated in the expression student underscore courses. So if I execute that, then you see I'm getting back the same result set. So that's a nice way to kind of simplify the representation of your queries. You have huge queries and you probably need to generate reports. And instead of, writing the huge query and then trying to save the query file and then trying to find it each time you need to run it, you can actually just write it, create a view, and then execute select statements on that view going forward. And the fun thing is that I can do all of the filtering and all of those fancy things. I can join the data in a view to another view, even to another table if I need to. But the point is, this is kind of a nice way to simplify the representation of the data. Now let's get a bit more complicated. What if my school administrators ask me to furnish a report showing all of the students, the subjects that they're enrolled in, and the teachers? So I would have to build on this query, and the outcome of that would be, more inner joins and so on. So I just wrote the query, and this query is something that we've done prior to this, so it shouldn't be too foreign to you. But as you can see, it's a bit more to this query than the last one. So the fact is, we sat down, we wrote the query, and we finally got it to a point where we're satisfied with the results of said query. Now, I don't want to have to execute this query every time, every week or every semester. I don't want to run the risk of saving this file and potentially losing this file. So what I'm going to do is make this query into a view. Now I have two options. I can take this query, having written it, and then going over to the views, and then right-clicking, creating a new view, going to the view designer, and then pasting it here. And just saying all of that, I'm kind of exhausted already. So I'm going to use a script and create the view instead. So I have everything here, but then above the select, I can actually run a create command right here in the script that will just create the view and define the view as this query that I have just spent so much time working on. So what I will say is something like create view. And of course, you have to use statements. If you haven't already selected the database, you'd have to use the use statement. So I'm actually going to show you what problem you might run into and how to solve it. And it's not really a problem, it's just a matter of awareness. If I use the use statement, then I need to say go and then run my create statement. All right, so without the go, I'll end up with a syntax error that's seemingly irrelevant. So of course you use go, and then you say create view, you give it a name. So this would be student subjects lecturers. So of course you want to give your views names that when I look at it, I can kind of get an idea of what data to expect should I query this view. All right, so I say create view and then give it the name and then say as. All right, and then what follows is the query that will define the view. So remember, once again, a view is really just a manifestation of a query. So I wrote this query, and instead of saving the file so I can execute it and run the risk of losing it or deleting it inadvertently, what I will do is just create it as a view. And then having done that, it will be attached to my database. So the next time I need to see this kind of data, I just query the view. So when I execute this script as it is, all right, so we're getting an error here, and it's saying that the order by clause is invalid in views and certain other objects. And the reason for that is that, well, for some reason, the view doesn't guarantee that the data is going to come back in that order. So we ordered by title. Let me just refresh. Ordered by course title. And that is an illegal operation inside of creating the view. So I'm just going to remember that for now. So I'm just going to cut this, not going to delete it, just cut it. And I'm going to go ahead and create the view. So now my view is successfully created. I don't see a difference here. I can just click views, refresh the folder, and now I see that my view, which is student, subject, lecturers, is available. So using this, well, I'm going to open a new query file. And then what I can now say is select star from, yes, you guessed it, student underscore subject underscore lecturers. All right. So that's the view that I just created. And once I do this and execute, it will execute this huge query that I just wrote in the background and bring up all of the results. Now notice, we remember that we initially had an order by, and it was ordering by the course title, and I took it out because it's illegal in a view. However, I do want my data set, which the view is returning, to be ordered by. So here's what I can do. I can say select star from my view, and then order by, and then I can't say c.title. So remember, I cut it, so I just paste it back. So I need to do a little refactoring. I can't order by c.title. There is no object in this query called c, but there is an object. Well, there is no object also called title. All right, so that's another important point. Based on our original query, where we were actually looking at the columns in the table and giving them aliases, all right, so remember we had c.title. C is an alias for courses, for the courses table, right? So we had c.title, but then we gave it the alias course title. So for the lifetime of this query, we could have, done other operations on the column name. So I could have ordered by c.title because it knows about the column name. Now the view, which is a virtual representation of that, doesn't know about the original column names. It doesn't care. So let me just take this back out here. It doesn't care about the original column names. It just knows that when I select star, the columns I know are teacher, first name, teacher last name, and whatever you see coming up here in the column titles, aka the aliases. So that means if I needed to order by one of these columns that would have gotten an alias, I need to order by the actual name of the column that I see appearing once I query this view. So in other words, I need to order by, and I have to use my square brace because there's a space in course title, and then I execute, and then you see that it is ordering by. So the red line will still appear. You don't need to worry about that, but this is what the user sees. This is what they know. Course title is the name of the column, so we can order by the name of the column we see coming back. And once again, we can always add on our where clause. So I can say where, and if I only wanted CS100, for instance, I can say where course code. Once again, square bracket, course code, because that's the name of the column that the view knows. Course code is equal to, and the string CS100, and then I execute that, and the filtering works. So everything that we're used to up until this point with writing queries against database tables is very possible. Sorry, everything that we're used to with selecting data from tables is possible with a view. However, when we have multiple tables and more complex queries, we don't have to continuously spend time and write them, but once we get them perfectly, we can save them as a view, and then going forward just write a simple select against that view to see the data. Now, with all that being said and done, all of that was just about creating the view. So a view can be managed otherwise. We can also say alter view. So maybe we needed to change the view itself. We needed to change the query. So we can say alter view, and we have that view name. So it looks really the same way as a create view, but we just change create to alter. And then what we would do is just modify that query and then execute, and whatever change we make will be reflected in the next time we execute against that view. All right. In a similar manner, we can actually right click the view and go to design, which will bring up that query editor. So remember that student underscore subject underscore lecturers, that's the one we created via script, but it can be opened up and modified inside of the view editor. So maybe we didn't want one of these titles, like maybe course code was no longer necessary. So if I actually go to the courses table and untick course code, then it would remove it. And then if I save, then it would have altered the view either way. All right, so those are two ways you can alter your view. Another thing you can do to manage your view is probably rename it. So students underscore lecturers underscore subjects. Sorry, I read it in the wrong order, but the fact is it's a long name. What if we just wanted it to be called student enrollment? So we can actually just right click the view here in the editor and just click rename, and that makes it editable. We can rename it here. Or if I wanted to do it via script, our code would look something like this. So we would say exec, which is a keyword that we're going to learn when we start looking at stored procedures, and it's short for execute. And then we have sp underscore rename. Sp is kind of like a tell for stored procedure, s stored p procedure. So we have a stored procedure that comes with SQL called rename. So it's sp underscore rename. And then we say which object it is that we want to rename, which is a view by the name students, subjects, lecturers. And we want the new name to be student enrollments. And then when we execute this and then go back to our views folder and refresh, then we see the student underscore enrollments is now the name of our view, which means if we execute the previous query, select star from student underscore subject underscore lecturers, then it would give us an error that there is no object by that name, because the new name for this view is student enrollments. So if I make that change and execute again, then we're right back where we started. Now, I hope that the use of views makes sense to you. It's very flexible. You can always change the query that generates the view, and ultimately you don't always want users, whether database users or even application users, to have to interact directly with your tables all the time. So you probably want to build your application around views, and each view is run by a carefully crafted query for that particular interface, or even just for general database access and use. You probably don't want users to have to sit down and figure out where to find what field across 2-3 tables. So you, as the database developer, you can actually just do the script, create the view, and each time they want that data, you just tell them there's the view, that's the view, you go for that data. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Stick around for more.